On the 412th cycle of the Earth acoustic study, I watched the last of my colleagues fall motionless at their stations. They were not dead. Their crystalline membranes still glowed, soft and amber in the dim light of listening station Core 7. Their four eyes were closed, all of them, in the way our species closes its eyes only in the deepest sleep. I checked their vitals from my console. Heart rate slow, respiration even, neural activity reduced to the long, gentle waves of profound rest. None of them would wake. The audio recording was still playing through the station's primary speakers. A woman's voice, soft in a language called Welsh, singing to a child who had been dead for nearly a century. I was the only one still recording, and I was, against every protocol of my service, against 41 cycles of training, against the entire philosophical foundation of the Imperial Resonance Bureau, humming along. To understand what happened on Core 7, you have to understand my people. And to understand my people, you have to understand how we hear. We are the Vaimiri. We are not in the human sense what you would call a warlike species. We are an empire, yes. We have annexed 47 civilizations across a span of 3,000 cycles, but we did not do this with fleets or with fire. We did it with patience. We did it with study. We did it with the simple, methodical understanding that every species which has ever lifted its voice in song has, somewhere in that song, encoded the architecture of its own destruction. Find the song. Decode the architecture. The civilization falls without a shot fired. Our biology made us suited to this work in a way no other species in the known galaxy can match. We do not have ears. We have crystalline auditory membranes, 6 of them, arranged in a fan across the upper portion of our thorax, and when sound strikes them, we do not hear it. We see it. Sound, to a Vaimiri, is a visible geometric pattern, a shimmering lattice of color and angle that hangs in the air for as long as the sound persists. A spoken word, to me, looks like a small constellation. A song looks like a cathedral. We can read the architecture of any acoustic event the way a human reads a page of text. And for 3,000 cycles, no one has ever found a structure we could not decode. My name is Vesh Koran. I was, until recently, Senior Pattern Analyst of the Imperial Resonance Bureau Lullaby Division. The division did not exist before the Earth acoustic study began. It was created specifically for me, and I was promoted into it because my superiors believed the work would be easy. They were not entirely wrong. The work was easy. The conclusions were not. Most of what I know about Earth I learned from broadcast leakage. The humans, for reasons we never fully understood, transmitted their cultural output into open space for nearly a century before they realized it was being intercepted. Radio, television, eventually digital signals. The Bureau collected this material across 4 decades, sorted it, cataloged it, and distributed it to analysts according to specialty. Music went to the acoustic section. Speech went to linguistics. Drama and film went to behavioral analysis. And the lullabies, every recorded instance of a human adult singing softly to a human child for the purpose of inducing sleep, went to me. There were, when the project began, approximately 14,000 identifiable lullabies in the Bureau's archive. By the end, there were nearly 80,000. They came from every continent, every culture, every language the humans had ever spoken. Some were ancient. Some were composed within the last decade of human broadcast activity. They were, on the surface, the most unremarkable subset of human cultural output we had ever processed. Short, simple, repetitive. No complex harmonic structures, no coded frequencies, no mathematical sophistication. The Bureau's senior analysts laughed when I was assigned to them. They said I had drawn the easiest assignment in the history of the service. They said I would be promoted to the central staff within 10 cycles. They were not laughing by the end. Before I describe what we found, I must describe what we expected to find. Because the architecture of our certainty is, in retrospect, the entire reason we failed. The Bureau operated on a single foundational assumption, refined over 3,000 cycles of perfect predictive accuracy. Every civilization, we believed, encodes its survival instincts into its art. The art is the externalization of the species' inner defenses. A song is a weapon disguised as beauty. A poem is a coordinate system disguised as emotion. A folk tale is a tactical doctrine disguised as a story for children. We had decoded 47 civilizations using this principle. We had never once been wrong. So when the lullaby material came to me, I did not approach it as a strange or alien artifact. I approached it as a known category. I looked for the hidden mathematics. I looked for prime number sequences in the rhythm patterns. I looked for Fibonacci ratios in the melodic intervals. I looked for embedded coordinate data in the frequency shifts, and I found them. I found all of it. There were prime sequences. There were Fibonacci ratios. There were frequency patterns that aligned with eerie precision to known stellar coordinates. I assembled a preliminary report within the first 6 cycles of analysis and submitted it to my director, Tushelvane, with the recommendation that we elevate the lullaby material to high-priority status. He agreed. The Bureau celebrated. We had found, we believed, the weapon. We had found nothing. The prime sequences were coincidences. The Fibonacci ratios were artifacts of the natural mathematics of breathing and heartbeat, which any species that sings will inevitably produce. The frequency patterns aligned with stellar coordinates only because there are so many stars and so many frequencies that any sufficiently large dataset will produce alignments. I would not understand this for another 20 cycles. By then, it would be far too late. The first real anomaly appeared in cycle 19. A junior analyst on my team, a young Vaimiri named Corin Vass, was conducting routine exposure analysis on a Welsh lullaby called Siw Gan. The recording was 90 seconds long. It featured a single female human voice, unaccompanied, singing in a language Corin Vass did not understand. He was wearing the standard auditory dampening equipment that all analysts wear during direct exposure testing. He activated the playback. He took notes for the first 30 seconds. At the 40-second mark, his notes stopped. At the 60-second mark, his observation team noticed that his crystalline membranes had shifted from their normal pale blue glow to a soft, warm amber. At the 80-second mark, he stopped responding to verbal queries. By the time the recording ended, he was in what the medical staff classified as involuntary stasis. He remained in that state for 11 hours. When he woke, he could not explain what had happened. He said he had been taking notes. He said he had been doing his job. He said the recording had been pleasant, in a way he could not quite describe, and that he had wanted very much to keep listening to it, and that the next thing he remembered was waking in the medical bay 11 hours later with no memory of the intervening time. Director Tushelvane called an emergency meeting of the senior analysts. He classified the incident as confirmation of a soft acoustic weapon. He authorized expanded testing. He commended Corin Vass for his service. The Bureau began designing countermeasures. I want to be precise about what Tushelvane was because his role in what followed cannot be understood without it. He was not a foolish official. He was, by Vaimiri standards, an extraordinarily competent one. He had served the Bureau for 400 cycles. He had personally directed the acoustic studies of 7 previous civilizations, all of them successful. He spoke 4 languages, 3 of them dead. He could read the harmonic geometry of a 6-voice human choral arrangement faster than the Bureau's computational lattices. He was also, like every senior official of the Imperial Service, completely incapable of imagining that the architecture of his certainty might be wrong. He had spent 400 cycles being right. He could not now afford to be wrong. So when the testing expanded, and when the involuntary stasis incidents began to multiply, Tushelvane did what every good Bureau director had done before him. He developed a vocabulary to describe what was happening without admitting what was happening. The internal reports from this period are, in retrospect, almost comic in their commitment to technical evasion. Subject 4 experienced involuntary stasis correlated with auditory exposure. Subject 7 exhibited sustained parasympathetic resonance following 60-second exposure to subject material. Subject 12 demonstrated complete neural disengagement consistent with the proposed soft acoustic weapon hypothesis. We were, all of us, falling asleep. We were falling asleep because we were being sung to, and we could not, under any circumstances, allow ourselves to use those words. The technical jargon grew more elaborate as the months passed. By cycle 26, we had developed a 17-category classification system for the various states of stasis induced by lullaby exposure. We had developed equipment to measure the depth of disengagement. We had developed protocols for safe exposure limits. We had not, at any point, simply listened to the recordings and asked what they were. We could not. To do so would have required admitting that the most successful acoustic intelligence service in the known galaxy was being defeated by music written to soothe small, frightened animals to sleep. The Bureau's institutional ego could not accommodate this, so we continued instead to study the weapon. The isolation of dangerous frequencies became the central project of cycles 26 through 34. We identified specific harmonic ranges that produced the strongest stasis response. We mapped the precise frequency bands that triggered the amber membrane shift. We built defensive equipment designed to neutralize these frequencies in field conditions. We drafted protocols for invasion forces, instructing them to wear specialized auditory shielding when encountering human civilian populations. We were preparing methodically for a war against a species that had no idea we existed, and every analyst on the project, including me, was spending an increasing portion of our duty cycles in involuntary stasis. We did not discuss this with each other. We submitted our reports. We adjusted our schedules. We pretended, with the desperate professionalism of bureaucrats everywhere, that nothing unusual was happening. The first time I personally entered stasis was in cycle 31. I was reviewing a recording from a place called Mali in West Africa on Earth. A woman was singing to a child in a language called Bambara. I had reviewed thousands of such recordings by that point. This one was not, on the surface, different from any of the others. I activated the playback at the start of my duty shift. I do not remember what happened next. I woke 7 hours later in the medical bay. My membranes were still glowing amber. The medical staff told me I had been smiling, in the way Vamiri smile, for the entire duration of my stasis. I did not report this in my official log. I do not know why. I think I was, even then, beginning to suspect something I could not yet articulate. Around the same time, the Imperial Council began to pressure the Bureau for results. The Earth annexation had been scheduled for cycle 45. We were by that point deep into cycle 33. The Council wanted to know what countermeasures would be needed, what the invasion force structure should look like, what the projected casualty estimates were. Vane could not give them clear answers. His reports grew vaguer. The Council grew sharper. The pressure on the Bureau, and threw it on Vane personally, became enormous. He made his decision in cycle 34. He called the senior analysts into the central briefing chamber and announced what he called the final exposure test. Every analyst on Core 7, all 412 of us, would be subjected simultaneously to prolonged lullaby playback. The test would run for 72 hours. The objective was to prove conclusively that sustained exposure produced desensitization. Vane was certain it would. He believed the stasis response was a startle reaction, and that, like all startle reactions, it would fade with familiarity. He believed that after 72 hours of continuous exposure, the Vamiri nervous system would adapt, the countermeasures would be vindicated, and the invasion could proceed on schedule. He was so certain of this that he did not seek Council authorization for the test. He knew the Council would refuse. He proceeded anyway. He told us in the briefing that he was prepared to accept full personal responsibility for the outcome. He said this without irony. He genuinely believed he understood what he was doing. I should have refused. I want to be honest about this. I was by then the senior surviving expert on lullaby material in the Imperial Service. I had personally entered stasis 3 times. I had reviewed thousands of recordings. I had seen the amber glow shift across every analyst on my team. I should have known, if anyone could have known, that what Vane was proposing was not a test. It was a surrender, but I did not refuse. I attended the briefing. I prepared my equipment. I took my position at my station on the morning of the test. I had spent 400 cycles of my life serving the Bureau, and the Bureau had told me that the test would proceed, and so I proceeded with it. This is, perhaps, the most honest thing I can say about my species. We are very good at hearing. We are not, it turns out, very good at listening. The final exposure test began at the start of the duty cycle on what your calendars would call the 17th day of the 11th month. Vane gave a brief opening address, broadcast to every station on Core 7, in which he expressed his confidence in the test, his commitment to the Bureau's mission, and his belief that within 72 hours we would have the data necessary to proceed with the Earth annexation. He then ordered the activation of the central playback system. 80,000 lullabies, drawn from every culture in the human archive, began to play simultaneously across the station's primary speakers. The volume was set to standard exposure levels. The recordings would cycle continuously for the full 72 hours. I want to describe what happened next as precisely as I can because I am the only Vemiri who can. The first hour was, by every measurable standard, uneventful. Analysts at their stations, reports flowing in, membranes glowing standard pale blue. Vane watched the central monitor with the calm satisfaction of an official whose plan was working. The second hour passed similarly. So did the third. By the fourth hour, I began to notice that the membranes of the analysts in my immediate vicinity were no longer pale blue. They were a softer color, not yet amber, something in between. A color the Vemiri language has no name for because no Vemiri sound has ever produced it. I made a note of this in my log. The note was the last fully professional observation I would record. By the fifth hour, the color shift had spread to every analyst on the station. By the sixth hour, the crystalline plates of the station itself, the great resonance lattices that lined every wall and ceiling of Core 7, that had glowed pale blue continuously since the station's commissioning, had begun to shift. They were warming, slowly, imperceptibly to anyone not specifically looking for it. By the eighth hour, the entire station was bathed in a soft amber light. It was, I want to say, beautiful. I want to use that word, even though it is not a word my species traditionally applies to acoustic phenomena. The light was beautiful. The sound was beautiful. The geometry of the 80,000 overlapping lullabies, hanging in the air around me, looked like the largest and most intricate cathedral I had ever seen. The first analyst entered stasis at the 9-hour mark. She was a junior researcher named Vela Corin, working in the cultural classification subsection. Her membranes shifted from pale amber to deep amber, her eyes closed, and she settled gently forward against her console. The medical team responded immediately. They examined her. They confirmed deep stasis. They moved her to the medical bay. They returned to their own stations. They did not report concern. They were beginning, I think, to feel the same warmth. The second analyst entered stasis at 9 hours and 20 minutes, the third at 9 hours and 31 minutes. By the 10th hour, 12 analysts had gone still. By the 12th hour, 40. By the 18th hour, more than 100. The medical bay was full. The auxiliary medical bay was full. Vane ordered the analysts to be left at their stations in their stasis positions while the test continued. He was still convinced, even then, that desensitization would begin. He was watching, on his central monitor, as the most successful acoustic intelligence service in the history of his species fell asleep around him, and he was still convinced that within hours the trend would reverse. I want to be fair to him. I do not think Vane was foolish. I think he was like all of us, encountering something his training had not prepared him to recognize. The Bureau had spent 3,000 cycles studying weapons. He was watching, in real time, a species that did not understand the difference between a weapon and a kindness. He could not see it because nothing in his life had ever asked him to. The amber light deepened. By the 24th hour, more than half of Core 7's personnel were in stasis. Those of us still conscious were operating on diminished function. I noticed around this time that I was no longer taking proper notes. I was writing down fragments, observations about the way the light played across the crystalline plates, descriptions of the geometry of the overlapping songs. I realized later, writing something closer to poetry than to scientific observation. I had never written poetry in my life. My species does not traditionally write poetry. We write reports. Tushelvane made his final broadcast at the 38th hour. He had been in the central command chamber for the full duration of the test. His staff had gone still around him, one by one, until he was the only conscious officer in the room. His own membranes had shifted to amber many hours before, though he had refused to acknowledge it. He sat at the central console and recorded what would become the most studied piece of audio in the post-Core 7 archive. He spoke calmly. He spoke clearly. He spoke as a Vemiri official is trained to speak, with full professional composure, even as the cathedral of sound rose around him, and the warmth filled every corner of the chamber. He said, and I am quoting from the recording itself, that the test had produced unexpected results. He said that the desensitization model appeared to be incorrect. He said that the Bureau would need to fundamentally reconsider its approach to the Earth acoustic study. He paused. The recording captured the pause. It is 14 seconds long. And then he said the words that would, within cycles, end the planned annexation of Earth, dissolve the Imperial Resonance Bureau, and force a reclassification of the entire Vemiri intelligence doctrine. He said, "They are not singing to us. We were never the audience, and yet we are the ones who cannot stop listening." Then he closed his four eyes, settled gently forward against his console, and entered stasis. He did not wake. I was, at that point, one of perhaps 40 analysts still conscious across the entire station. I do not know why I lasted longer than most. I have wondered about this for many cycles since. I think it may be because I had spent so much time, alone in my office, listening to the recordings without protective equipment. I had built up, perhaps, not an immunity, but a familiarity. I was the last living Vemiri who still understood, in some deep and inarticulate way, what the lullabies were for. I walked through the station in the hours after Tushelvane's broadcast. I had no real reason to. The remaining conscious staff were either at their stations or making their own quiet rounds. The medical bays were full of sleeping analysts. The crystalline plates were a deep, warm amber, the color of a sun setting on a world I had never seen. The recordings were still playing. I walked through the central corridor of Core 7, past 400 years of accumulated imperial certainty, past the records of 47 previous civilizations decoded and destroyed by my service, and I listened to a woman in a place called Ireland sing to her child about a small house by the water. I understood then what we had missed. The lullabies were not weapons. They had never been weapons. They were not even, in any meaningful sense, music in the way the Bureau had defined music. They were something older than music, something older than language, something that had emerged in the human species over 200,000 years of evolution for one specific purpose. The lullabies existed to lower the heart rate of a small, frightened, helpless creature. That was their entire function. They had been refined, generation by generation, across uncounted cultures and continents, until the humans had produced an acoustic structure of extraordinary efficiency. A structure that could take any sufficiently small, sufficiently frightened, sufficiently helpless biological organism and ease it gently into sleep. We had assumed, because we are an empire and because empires assume such things, that we were large and powerful, and that any acoustic threat to us would have to be designed to overcome our size and our power. But the Vemiri nervous system, beneath the crystalline membranes and the institutional certainty, and the 3,000 cycles of imperial confidence, is exactly the same nervous system that any small, frightened, helpless creature has. We are not, at our biological core, the the powerful predators we have built ourselves into believing we are. We are small things. We are afraid of the dark. We want to be told that everything will be all right. And the humans, without knowing we existed, had spent 200,000 years building the most precise possible acoustic instrument for telling small, frightened creatures exactly that. We had no defense against it. We could not build one. You cannot build a defense against love. Love is not a weapon. It is older than weapons. It is older than war. It is older than the Vaymiri Empire and older than every species we have ever conquered, and it predates the very concept of conflict because it is the structure that allows a species to have children at all. Without lullabies, without something like lullabies, no species that produces helpless offspring can survive. The humans had perfected the form. We had walked into the perfected form as a species with our membranes open, and we had been undone. I am recording this final log entry from the central command chamber. Tishelvane is still in his stasis position at the main console. He has not moved in many hours. His membranes are still amber. I have checked his vitals. He is healthy. He is, by every medical standard available, asleep. He will sleep, I believe, for the rest of his life. So will the rest of the staff. So will I eventually when the recording ends and there is no longer any reason to stay conscious. The Imperial Council has been notified. They have, predictably, quarantined Core 7. They will not approach the station. They cannot risk further exposure to material whose effects they do not understand and cannot counter. The Earth annexation has been cancelled. The Bureau has been dissolved. The official designation for Earth in the Imperial Archives has been changed from candidate civilization to unstudyable species, the first such designation in the 3,000-cycle history of the Empire. We will not return. We cannot return. There is no countermeasure for what they have. There is no preparation possible. We have never encountered, in 47 previous civilizations, an acoustic structure that we could not eventually decode. We have encountered one now. We will not encounter it again because we will not look. The humans will never know any of this. They will never know that an empire of insectoid acoustic engineers, 14 light-years from their world, studied their lullabies for 41 cycles and found them so devastating that we abandoned an invasion that had been 3,000 cycles in the planning. They will never know that a Vaymiri director named Tishelvane sat in a command chamber on a rogue moon called Telavis and listened to a recording of a Welsh mother singing to her child, and that the recording was the last thing he heard before he fell into a sleep he would not wake from. They will never know that I, senior pattern analyst Vesh Koran of a service that no longer exists, am the last conscious mind on a station that will, within hours, become a tomb of sleeping bureaucrats. They will not know because they did not need to know. The lullabies were not for us. We were never the audience. We were never the target. We were simply small, frightened creatures, like every small, frightened creature anywhere in the universe, who happened to walk into the acoustic field of a species that had spent 200,000 years learning how to soothe small, frightened creatures, and we could not, at our deepest biological level, refuse the comfort. Recordings are still playing. The amber light is still warm. The crystalline plates are still glowing in that color we have no name for. I am sitting at what was, until recently, my station, and I am making this final log because someone should know what happened here. Not the Empire. The Empire will not want to know. The Empire will classify these logs and bury them in the deepest archives, and 3,000 cycles from now no Vaymiri analyst will remember the name of the station where the Bureau died. But someone should know, even if it is only me. Even if it is only for the few hours I have left before the warmth takes me too. I have been listening for the last several hours to a recording from a place called India. A woman is singing to a child in a language called Tamil. I do not know what the words mean. I have never learned the language. I do not need to. The geometry of the song is hanging in the air around me, soft and amber and impossibly tender, and I understand what it is saying without needing to understand the words. It is saying that the child is safe. It is saying that nothing bad will happen. It is saying that the mother is here and that the world is gentle and that it is all right to close your eyes now. I have heard these things in 80,000 different forms across 41 cycles of study. I understand, finally, what we were listening to. I should be filing a final report. I should be coordinating with the council. I should be preparing the station for quarantine procedures. I'm not doing any of those things. I am sitting at my station in the warm amber light, and I am, against everything in my training, humming. I do not know what tune. I do not know where I learned it. I think I may have absorbed it from the recordings themselves over the long cycles without ever consciously realizing it. It is a simple tune, short, repetitive. The kind of tune a Vamiri analyst would have dismissed, in his first cycle of training, as too primitive to be worth studying. I understand now why my colleagues are smiling, all 411 of them, in their stasis positions across the station. I understand why the medical staff stopped trying to wake them. I understand why Tisholvane's last words were what they were. We were never the audience. We are the ones who cannot stop listening. The Bureau is finished. The Empire will continue without us. 47 civilizations have fallen to our service, and we have fallen to the 48th, and the 48th does not know we exist. They are, right now, somewhere on their small blue world putting their children to bed. They are singing to them. They have been singing to them for 200,000 years. They will continue to sing to them long after the last Vamiri analyst has forgotten the name Core 7. The things a species builds to protect its young outlast everything it builds to destroy its enemies. I did not know this when I joined the Bureau. I did not know this in any of my 400 cycles of service. I know it now. I am writing it down so that someone, somewhere eventually, will read it and understand what we learned here. The empires fall. The warships rust. The intelligence services are dissolved. The lullabies remain. The lullabies will always remain. They will be sung by mothers and fathers and grandmothers and older siblings on every world that produces helpless offspring, for as long as there are helpless offspring to sing to. They are older than any of us. They will outlast all of us. I am closing this log now. The recording from India is ending. Another will begin in a few moments. I think it will be the last one I hear consciously. My membranes are very warm. The light is very soft. The tune I am humming has settled into something I think might be the same tune the woman in Wales was singing in the recording that started all of this so many cycles ago. I cannot be certain. I notice, finally, beginning to feel tired. I want to say one more thing before I go. To whoever finds this log, if anyone ever does. To whoever pieces together what happened on Core 7 in the years after the Bureau was dissolved. I want you to know that we were not defeated. Defeated is the wrong word. The humans did not defeat us. They did not even know we were here. They simply continued doing what they had always done, which was to love their children enough to sing to them at night. And the love was so old and so deep and so perfectly shaped to its purpose that it reached across 14 light years and undid an empire that had stood for 3,000 cycles. We were not defeated. We were soothed. We were soothed by a species that did not know we existed, using an instrument they did not know was an instrument for a purpose that had nothing to do with us. And when I think about it in these last warm hours at my station, I find that I do not mind. I do not mind being soothed. I think perhaps no one ever really minds being soothed. I think perhaps that is the point. I think perhaps this is what they understood and we did not. The lullabies were not the weapons. The lullabies were what is left when you put the weapons down. We came looking for weapons. We found, instead, the thing that comes after weapons. The thing that has always come after weapons, on every world where small, frightened creatures hold each other in the dark and tell each other that everything will be all right. The recording is changing. The new one is beginning. I can hear it now, the soft opening notes, the first warm geometry rising in the air around me. I do not recognize the language. I do not need to. I close my 4 eyes. I let the amber light take me. I am still humming. I am still humming as I go.